Welcome to the Startup Leader Show, where we learn lessons from leading startup founders and executives. I'm your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Michael Bloxton. He is the chairman and CEO of Nebula Compute. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Maybe you can start by giving us just a little bit of background on yourself and Nebula Compute.
So, like many people watching, I have been a fan of space, but I never knew, literally never knew that I belonged in space. I don't have any background in it. I'm not an aerospace engineer. I don't have like a family that's in space. I grew up outside of Philly and really went into sales and finance and did that route. And it wasn't until my son was born where I started thinking about what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, but what he deserved his future to be. And I believe his future absolutely includes space in a very meaningful, deep way. If he wants to go work on the moon or he wants to go do a couple of years on Mars or hop on a space station, that should be his option. And I didn't see that based on where things were a few years ago when he was born. So I started thinking about, well, how do I execute on a revenue generating business model that can start supporting that type of future? And that's what Nebula is.
Wow, fascinating. So, so tell me a little bit more about what you guys are actually doing.
So Nebula Compute specifically is bringing cloud computing to space. If you look at how humans use processing today, it's an afterthought. It's something that's a given. It's like this gift of just being able to breathe in an atmosphere. Is how deeply, intimately we work with processing,
Mhm.
and the way that it happens in space is absolutely not that. It's like not even close to that. We're sending up. If anyone's familiar with James Webb, the processor on James Webb is almost 2 decades old. And if you think about talking to anybody on the planet Earth saying, hey, I want you to go from your current iPhone, whatever model that is, because it's not that old, to the iPhone 3G. And people would pull their hair out because they've gotten so intimately familiar with how they operate at that level of technology. Yet in space, we don't. In space, we're using things that are so outdated that we're working on a terrestrial environment where we can create really, really cool algorithms, AI, ML, and then translating that to space is difficult. There are teams of people trying to figure out how to get this algorithm that works perfectly in the cloud based on multiple terrestrial grade servers and get that to work on a 2010 CPU. It's a really difficult thing. So Nebula is taking the approach of, well, how do we ultimately get data centers in space? How do we solve this gap to where you have the experience we have today with computing in space?
Sure, sure. Wow. Okay, so how far down the path are you on this whole journey?
As a CEO, I would say not far enough. As a fan of space, farther than I expected us to get. Well, not expected us to get, farther than um, everyone else expected us to get. We are actually right now about to put our payload through TVAC chamber, Vibe, and all that stuff, and we're delivering it for launch early next year on the outside of the ISS. So the idea that we started with is how do we take terrestrial grade, data center grade equipment and have that operate in the vacuum of space? The thermal issues are significant, the radiation issues are significant. And how do we do that so like I can take something off the shelf and get it into space in less than a year versus the roughly average 6 years? And we are taking a box that allows commercial off the shelf servers to work in space. And we will be putting that on the outside of the ISS early next year. So we're proving out all of our core IP and the technology so that we can scale that into much larger server sets.
Wow, that sounds amazing. That is really exciting. Well, great. So we invited you here today to talk a little bit about your experience in building this amazing new space startup kind of from the ground up. And I thought maybe we would start by having you just talk a little bit about what your biggest keys to your success have been so far.
I feel humbled when I started this. Again, I have no background in space or aerospace of any kind. So I had a bit of imposter syndrome when I first started several years ago. And I had this really big idea. I started with, I think the first critical thing that allowed me to kind of start on the path of success was, um, what do I want to dedicate my life to? And I literally thought of something that I would be willing to die for, and something that was going to take me decades to figure out. And once I had that, I started thinking about, well, how do I actually get there? What's the path to be able to solve this insanely huge thing? Specifically, it's provide all of humanity access to deep space and infinite resources. Because I believe once you do that, you can remove 95% of the reasons we have conflict here on Earth. How in the world do you solve a problem like that? That led me down several paths, but ultimately, that was the first key. The second was asking myself good questions. And someone had shared a quote with me from Albert Einstein, arguably one of the smartest humans to grace us with his presence ever. And he said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes thinking of the right question to ask. And then he had, again, arguably the smartest person in human history, another quote on questions, which was, the quality of life you live is determined by the quality of questions you ask. So I got really good at asking better questions. And so that was the second key. I would say the third key was the kind of the who. So the imposter syndrome came up when people that were very, very successful, very accomplished would listen to me and be like, Mike, that's amazing. How do I support you? And I'm like, what? Like you're listening to me now. And this crazy vision that I had, and they're just like, I believe in it. I believe in you, and I want to support you. And the advisors that I was able to get in the early stages, when it was me and this crazy big idea, is astonishing. I mean, three-star generals, chief scientists of the ISS National Lab. I mean, very accomplished people. And again, I had no background. So I share that hopefully to inspire and encourage people to just take the leap anyway. But that was the third key, was really surrounding myself with the right people. And they helped me ask better questions. So it was this virtuous cycle of, here's the big vision. Let's ask good questions. Let's get great people that have knowledge. And then they helped me ask better questions and clarify that vision. And it was a very virtuous cycle.
Absolutely. It's kind of that, what do you have to lose, right? So contacting somebody that you don't know or what have you, it just, things have a tendency to just kind of come together when you're willing to take a little bit of risks or step outside your comfort zone, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Someone told me when I was 18 years old, the answer is always no if you never ask.
Yeah.
It might be
Yeah.
no, but it's always no if you never ask.
Absolutely. So, what would you say is the most valuable lesson that you've learned over the years?
Um, too many to count.
Yeah.
Failing forward is a really, really good one. And the concept there is written in there's actually a whole book by John C. Maxwell. One of the second book I ever read that I actually really enjoyed when I was 18 or 19 years old. And he says in that book, if you fail forward, the concept is you learn. As long as you learn, you can never learn less. And if you fail forward, you're at least your height closer to your goal, right? So as long as you're failing forward and you're learning something, you can't learn less. Therefore, you're still making progress to your goal, even when you fall flat on your face. And that happens. I think the other skill thing that I've learned is the figure it outness. Just figure it out. There's always going to be a situation you don't know how to handle, but if you sit with it, and again, this kind of goes back to Einstein, spend 55 minutes thinking of the right question to ask, even if you only have 60 minutes. And that stick to itness and figure it outness, like, okay, that happens all the time. I mean, on a weekly basis, there's something I wasn't expecting. I didn't know it was going to come down the line. I'm not exactly sure how to handle it, but let me sit with it and we can figure it out. And it's amazing at this point. The confidence I have in our ability as a team to figure these things out is so high because we've done it so many times, and just stick with it. Don't give up. Failing, the only true failure comes when you quit. But if you really sit with it and learn, then you can figure it out.
So you kind of go back to this question, asking the right questions. How do you have a process for coming up with the right questions?
If you started with so again, I started with this really big vision, something I was willing to trade my life for, that I was going to dedicate decades of my life to. So that was the why. That's like the fuel to why I can keep bashing my head through the wall to try and get things done. The how is is the kind of the elusive piece, and that's really starting to sit with the problem, thinking through the problem, looking for feedback, looking for understanding without making a decision, which is interesting. So if I talk to three different advisors, I get three different opinions, and it's key to not necessarily make a decision based off the first. It's like thinking you're an expert because you read one book on a subject.
Yeah.
Um, so that has been good, and then the process is really about sitting with the how. What am I going to do here? How am I going to accomplish this? And phrasing is very critical. Everyone has had this experience. Every single person that is listening to this, that will listen to this, has had an experience with asking a really crappy question in Google. And you lose like an hour of your life, or you start over. But we've all had the same experience where we've asked a great question in Google and you get the answer in milliseconds.
Mhm.
And crafting the question, I would say, is a bit of I use more of a framework than a process. And just thinking, what are the problems? What are the options? What am I aware of? What am I not aware of? Who might have experience with this? And kind of piece through the phrasing by which I would come up with it. And through that process, I always come up with an answer. Surprisingly, I mean, I've always come up with some answer. Sometimes the answer is wrong, but then that is informative to be able to ask a better question.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is there anything that you would do differently if you were to go back and start all over, knowing what you know now?
So I was asked this question just the other day, and interestingly, I don't think I would. The biggest issue we face as a company is um, not that what we're building isn't both wanted and needed. And I've confirmed that face to face with a colonel in the right PEO office in Space Systems Command. So, like, they are like, we want this, we need this. We didn't expect to have this capability available to us until 2025, 2026. We're doing this next year. That sounds fantastic, except budgets don't align. So now we're figuring out with them, like, well, they were planning on having budgets available 3 years from now, almost 4 years from today. How do we align this? Because they want it, they need it. So that's been
Mhm.
the biggest issue. And the other side of that, for anyone in space technology, we got lots of good pats on the back. Lots of good pats. That's a great idea, Mike. Go do it. Until I could say, like I said to you, it's like we're building a payload. It's going through environmental testing and it's going on the ISS. They didn't take it seriously. And once
Yeah.
we can say that, they're like, "Oh my goodness, this is coming so quick. Let's talk about it." So I don't know if there's much else I could have done. I was out there, preaching this about our capability for, a year and a half now, and everyone's like, "Hey, great, that's good, good job. We'd love it." They didn't take it seriously until we were bending metal and going through testing. So I don't know if there's much I could have done differently. My
Mhm.
team, we've been able to attract an amazing team, world class executives that have accomplished things along these lines. So I'm very grateful for where we're at. And again, I don't know if I could have collapsed time in any other way.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So as you're developing things like this, absolutely every time you run into a whole host of different roadblocks along the way, how have you found, or I guess the best ways to work around or over or through those roadblocks?
I think the best thing for us has always been starting at the end. Like, what are we trying to accomplish? Like, what do we need to get out of this thing? And that sometimes that shifts, but it doesn't shift as much. If you're looking at current circumstances, that stuff varies minute to minute. But your ultimate long-term objective, maybe your super long-term doesn't change that much. Your midterms change a little bit. So it's the perfect filter when you're thinking about how do I take the next step. You could have a million different ways and paths in front of you, but only a few actually lead you to where you want to go. So if you're clear on what you need to do, we actually ran into kind of an A/B situation with this ISS mission. There was an objective by which we needed to accomplish, and then all sorts of other opportunities came up where, okay, well, now it actually is better for the business if we kind of take this path. So it was just like a slight movement, and that came up because we're thinking about, well, when exactly do we want to schedule the testing, and then you're thinking about the next thing. That's an easy filter. So having that kind of that end and your milestones that you're trying to accomplish helps you filter out, how am I going to accomplish this thing? When we do this, are we going to use this thing or that thing? Always, from if you look at it from the accomplishment, it's much easier to figure out.
Sure, sure. When you were working on getting this payload onto the ISS, what was your process? I mean, that can be a huge mountain to climb just in and of itself. So, how are you getting your payload actually launched, and how did this all kind of come about?
So I can explain it simply because my involvement in that is not as deep as you might expect. And to be clear, at this recording, we're still executing on this. We're still working on getting this accomplished. So the way that NASA works in general, they used to have a program called CASES, and I forget what it actually all stands for, commercial something, where they were working with industry to get payloads and experiments onto into the ISS. Cases is still there, but they don't work directly with industry. They've hired integrators, so Nanoracks and Airbus, specifically because those two have airlocks that are on top or on the outside of the ISS. So we engaged an integrator, and they did kind of the whole process, and they walked us through. Now, in this particular instance, that integrator had just started, so they're kind of having growing pains as we were going, and you just figure it out. Like this isn't something that hasn't been accomplished before, but the process by which you do it may have changed. Requirements may change. The size, the mass is different. The power is different. So you just work through those problems. So it's actually not as difficult as some might seem. If anybody's interested in getting something on the ISS, it's really not that difficult. They have integrators that help you work directly with NASA, and they can get you kind of through the process. Now, I'll go back to the team. Our team has experience getting lots of things in space. So when you can have the experience to say, oh, this is how this is actually going to work. It's similar to anyone in any field that's designing something versus manufacturing something. This is how it was designed to work. But when you actually get into manufacturing, you want the design a little bit different so that you can manufacture more efficiently. Similar types of trade-offs when we're working with NASA and integrators.
Sure. When you think about when you first were kind of getting this idea started, is there a piece of advice that you would give to other founders that are just getting started and that they might be able to use in getting things rolling?
Yes, I would put a challenge out there. I'm going to use a curse word for emphasis. We don't need another fucking app, right? The humanity isn't going to be saved because you built some other financial derivative application that runs on your phone and does like something. You might make some money, and honestly, I would say make money first if you could. But if you're going to dedicate your life to something, don't dedicate it to something that's easily accomplishable and doesn't move all of humanity forward. I say that because when I talk to people, if you're inspired and encouraged, and you can start thinking in a way that is impacting 1 billion people, then you should do something about it, because not everybody can think in that way. Not everybody is motivated to do that. I mean, I know some really, really good managers, project coordinators, people that are damn good at that, and they don't have the interest in going off and creating something new. But if you do have that interest, please, by God, do something about it. Focus on that. Focus on something big. If it scares you, then great. If it doesn't scare you, it's not big enough. So I would challenge everybody, and if you're working on something that doesn't, give you some heartburn at some point because it's really difficult, then it's probably not big enough, and you should be going for something much bigger. The world needs that. Humanity needs that.
Wow. Okay, I'm inspired. I got to think bigger. Okay, so I want to end with one last question, which is, if you could make one prediction about the future, what would it be?
We will be in space. Right now, we see a lot of conversation about, well, why not here? And if you look back through history, it was never really the current local situation that was driving, or that was necessarily driving everything. It was the exploration that was pulling things. Someone once told me simply, it was, you're pushed by pain or you're pulled by a vision. And being pushed by pain has happened to everybody. Being pulled by vision hasn't happened to everybody. And if you think about the 49ers when there was gold discovered in 1848. That was a pull. I mean, you literally pulled the entire not the entire, but a lot of the population across the country. And look at what that did. That opened up new frontiers, literally new frontiers. So I would say that the word of encouragement, the path for us is to be pulled by a vision and really set that up for yourself, set that up for your family, set that up for whatever it is that you believe in, and make it really far out there and big. And that'll help pull all of us along that path.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for being here today and telling us a little bit about what Nebula Compute is working on. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully we can have you on again.
No problem. It was great to be here, Lisa. Always happy to stop by.